Before I do my talk for the last book of the Unicorn Chronicles, I'm gonna do a quick review for all the books in the saga, for the whole saga, the Unicorn Chronicles. So I just finished reading this. It's a pretty long saga. If you look at this, it's like 1,000 something pages. It's pretty long. So after reading the whole thing, number one, I'm glad to say that I enjoyed it and I was satisfied by the end, which means that even though they were 1,000 something pages, I did enjoy them. I feel that it was a good experience that I gained after reading this, and I feel like I really used my time, my reading time, which is pretty limited, well by reading this series. Yeah, because I think it's pretty tragic to use your reading time in 1,000 pages and reach the end and not like it. That's a waste of time. So I'm very glad every time I read something and I reach the end and I see that I enjoyed it or I loved it or it gave me a good experience in some way for my life. So this series, okay, there are 3 books here, but in reality there are 4, because the first one, this one, has 2 books in one, Into the Land of the Unicorns and Song of the Wanderer. So in this book you got 2 of them. Those 2 are sold separately, so you may get them separately if you want, but if you buy the one that looks like this, and that is named the Unicorn Chronicles, what it really is the first 2 books of the saga in just one. And this is what I recommend, because it has the price of one. So you get 2 of them, 1 book, in the price of one, which is the way to go. So the first one is pretty short. The first one is like 150 pages, or 60 I think. It's pretty short, but it feels longer. It's a good story, for sure. And you'll be able to read it pretty quickly, like in a weekend. Which is what I really enjoy about the first one. The first one, I think it is as good as the second, but the second is much longer. The second is like the rest of this book, like 330 pages, I think. In general, I think that I will rate all the books pretty close to each other, even though in size they're very different size. Like the first one, 160 pages. The second one, 330. The third one, 400 something. And the last one is huge. The last one is 600 pages. Super long. I'm so glad that it ended well, and that it ended in a way that left me satisfied, because imagine reading all those books and the last one being 600 pages and not liking the ending, or the way they close things and they finish everything, or how they answer some of the questions, some of the big questions in the story. That would be so I'm so glad it didn't happen with this series. So in general, I will give the whole series. I'm not going to spoil anything in this review, by the way. This is spoiler-free. So I'm not going to say anything that is going to spoil it for you. In general, I will give, if you consider that I will not give anything a 10, I will reserve the 10 for my favorite story of all time, something like that. So I will not give anything a 10. If you consider that, I will give this series a solid 8, very solid 8. And I am someone that isn't crazy about unicorns and horses or anything like that. So if you're someone that feels or thinks that you like the idea of unicorns, I'm pretty sure that you will give this series at least a solid 8.5 out of 10. I give it an 8 out of 10. And at the beginning of the series, I wasn't that interested in unicorns, but I was very interested in finding other great stories, other interesting stories in the genres of adventure, fantasy, with good plots, with good characters, and I didn't know what to get next, and I did my research and looked at people's reviews, and my gut instinct told me, try out this series, read the Unicorn Chronicles. It's probably something that you will like, even though I wasn't very interested on unicorns, and I was right. My instinct was right. I picked a good series. I'm very glad of that because it's pretty long. So basically, I wouldn't just rate the whole series a solid 8 out of 10. I would rate each book separately a solid 8 out of 10, but you have to read them together. So this is a series that is, all the books are a continuation of each other. So it doesn't make any sense to read the second if you don't know anything about the first, or to read the third if you didn't read the first two, and the last one is only very good if you know what happened in the first 3 books. So you have to read in order. So all of them, I give them an 8. Into the Land of the Unicorns, Song of the Wanderer, Dark Whispers, The Last Hunt. Each one of them, I give them a solid 8. There were parts that I liked more out of some of them, obviously, and there were parts that I liked less. Like in the first book, I think the idea of the journey and the idea of the fact that it is your first experience with this new land that the author created, it makes it pretty interesting, I think, and it is very well named. Into the Land of the Unicorns, that's a perfect name for the first book. So I think that the wonders and the feel of this new land is the best part about the first book, and the plot twist. There's a big plot twist close to the end of the book. I really enjoyed that plot twist. I think those were the best parts of the first book. I really don't have anything bad to say about the first book. If I want to, like nitpick on what I can find that I didn't like too much about the first one, I will say the ending was okay. The first one, it lets you know that there's gonna be more. So if you want to know what that more is, you have to get the second book. It finishes well, but it is an ending that is just, like normal and peaceful. It's nothing special, really. You need that. You know that you need to read the other book if you want to know what happens after that. So it is a pretty normal ending. Nothing special at the end. And I didn't like the beginning too much. I feel that the first chapter with the chase with the hunter, it didn't make me. It might make a 10-year-old or someone who's 12 feel anxious and feel that, that chase. I didn't feel any chase. So the introduction for the first book, I don't want to say it wasn't that great because it wasn't bad, but it really didn't hook me. I began liking the first book after page when they begin telling you more about the land of Luster. That's when I began liking the first book, and when I began thinking that yes, this can be a good book, and it ended up being a good book. So yeah, you have to read like 40 pages out of 160 for the first book to really pick up pace and begin to get good. So have some patience. So in general, the first one was like a solid 8 for me. But you need to keep reading if you want to see the best stuff in this series. I think the best stuff in this series doesn't happen in the first book. Even though the first book is pretty good, and it is short, 160 pages, so you can read it in just one weekend. The second book, Song of the Wanderer, is a little better than the first book, I think. It was pretty slow at first, so it took a while to pick up the pace and to get to the good parts. It was like 300 pages, and it didn't begin to pick up pace to get into the good parts until it was beyond page 100. So you need to have some patience. The second book, so basically the first 100 pages of the second book are not better than the first book, but after that it begins to get even better than the first book, and by the end I enjoyed it more than the first book, because the ending and the plot twist close to the end in the second book, they are much better than the ending and the plot twist in the first book. Much better. So the way the second book ends and finishes in my opinion, is way better than the first book. So I really enjoyed the ending of the second book. It's very likely that it was the ending that I enjoyed the most in the whole series, even though the ending in the fourth book, in the last book, was pretty close to that one. It was pretty close, but I still think that I like the ending in the second book a little bit more than the one in the last one. So there are several things in the second book that I enjoy more. Like there's like a talk there with a dragon in the second book. They have something similar in the first book, but the one in the second is way better. Way better. And in the second book, the protagonist begins to become more interesting. Like in the first one, she wasn't my favorite character. She wasn't even my second favorite character in the first book. I think the hunter, the guy that was, the guy that's basically chasing after them, and that is not revealed until close to the end. I like that guy more than her, more than Kara, the protagonist in the first book. But in the second book, I didn't. I liked her more because she became a more interesting character in the second book, I think. The third book, it has big pluses that I really enjoyed and big minuses that I didn't enjoy much. However, when I added everything together, I enjoyed it as much as the second one, or maybe even a little bit more. But I think that it has to do with my age. I am in my 20s, and this saga was written with teenagers in mind. I think the third book is going to feel really good if you are an adult. If you're not too young, you're gonna love what they did in the third book. If you're younger, I think you're gonna like the second one more than the third, and maybe even the first one, because the third book gets the story gets more involved. There are more characters, there are more things going on, there's more happening, there are more questions. It begins to evolve, but there's also more violence. There's also, I think, there's one character that dies in the second book. Not the second, the third. There's one in Dark Whispers, which by the way, was named correctly, Dark Whispers, because the story in the saga gets darker in this book. There were things that I liked. Number one, I think the protagonist was already starting to feel like she's the main character here in this book, in the third one. And she also, I like the decisions that she took and what she did in the second book, in the third book, and the way the story was evolving with different plot lines, because there were like people at different places and they tell you what each one of them was going through. I really like that dynamic in this book. However, this book has a big chunk of the book, like 1/3 of the book at least, is covering the story, not at the city, but at the underground place where the Delvers live. And that 1/3 of the book, which is a lot, 1/3 of a 400 pages or something book, I didn't like it that much. It didn't feel like it just didn't feel like the first two books. It felt different, and I'm not saying that it didn't fit. It did fit with the overall story and the whole thing, but it's just, my personal taste. I just didn't enjoy it that much with those parts. They were trying to give you like a sensation of anxiety and fear, and I think that trying to do that in this series, it just wasn't ideal, but it was done okay. It wasn't right and badly. It's just a matter of me. my taste and what I like. I just didn't enjoy that part much. However, the villain, the way they develop the main villain in the third book, not really develop, the way they show you that villain, I really enjoyed that. I think that the third book got more interesting for me because of this new villain in the series. Pretty interesting villain, and that's actually a big question in the third book. Who is that? That new villain that is behind everything, and that obviously is gonna be a big problem for the protagonist, for the other characters. I also enjoyed I don't want to spoil anything. That's not the idea of this video, but there are like different paths in this book. The story of the protagonist and the story of another important character. I enjoyed the story of the important character even more than the main one. And they enter a place called the Ruby Prison, and I found that really interesting. I really enjoyed those parts in this book. So this book was kind of like a mixed bag, but with much more good than bad for me. And in general, at the very end, I enjoyed it as much as the first two. However, the end in this book is not like the end in the first one. The end in the first one, there's more, but they close it in a way that fits pretty well. The end in the third book is kind of like the end in the first God of War, in the second God of War game, where they finish and they tell you, well, if you want to know how this ends, you need to read the next book. We need to play the next game. It is a huge cliffhanger, the end in the third book, and you basically know that you have to wait for the fourth book to be able to know how it truly ends, which is not what happens here at the end of the third book. So yeah, there were some things that I'm pretty sure that many people are going to dislike out of the third book, but when you put everything in a balance, the other things I really enjoyed. Really enjoyed. So at the end, I ended up liking the third book even a little bit more than the second, except the ending. The ending, if we only look at the first three books, the ending of the second one was the best ending of those three. So yeah, so basically the last book, which is The Last Hunt, what this really is the continuation of the story in the third book. And obviously here, it's a pretty huge book. They complete it and they finish it, and they answer a lot of things, and they end the story, but they didn't answer absolutely everything. And that was the thing that I didn't like too much about the last book. What I liked is that I don't want to say I loved, because it's gonna make you feel like it was my favorite. I really enjoyed the ending in the last book, which is a blessing because this is a pretty long saga. So not liking the ending would have been a problem for sure, because I spent a lot of time reading this. So yeah, it's worth reading because I know you won't be disappointed by the end. On the contrary, this left me, the end of the last book left me pretty satisfied. I like the way they did things there. What I didn't like is that even though it was a huge 600-page book, they didn't answer every single question that you possibly had from book 3, maybe even from book 2. So whatever was left, they answered the major questions. So they don't leave you with the major questions, and they obviously solve the problem with the villains and all that. Well, not exactly solve, but you have to read it to find out. So the fourth book left me satisfied, and at the same time there were a few things that I wished to see there, like some answers, but they were not included. So it was like, and that is the reason why it felt like another solid 8, just like the other books in the series. Instead of feeling even better than the first 3, it felt the last book for me felt on par, right there, same score, same everything as the first three. Not because it wasn't better, it could have been way better than the first three, but because even though it was a little better, it still left a few things without an answer. And because of that, I was like, okay, I really enjoyed this, but this is not a 10. And I'm not sure about giving it a 9. Because it's, if it had answered that, I would have given it a 9. But it didn't. So, but at the end, and this is what matters, at the end I was satisfied. So and that's very important. When you finish reading so much and you are satisfied, it was a good read. Okay, so this is this way. So basically, I enjoyed the Unicorn Chronicles. Thank you so much, Mr. Bruce Scoville, for writing this series. It was a good series. It was fun to read it. I don't think the same way about unicorns after reading this. I think I like unicorns after reading this. And before I read it, I wasn't that interested in the, in the characters, basically. Or in the idea, even. But after reading this series, I do enjoy it. I add myself to the group of people that like these magical characters. And their stories, especially if they're well-written stories, good stories like these ones. So yes, I do recommend it. If you want a saga, if you want good stories with the idea of unicorns at the core of the story, this is a good place to begin it. This is a good series to read. I read it with the mindset of someone that wanted to find a really great story. I wasn't disappointed. I didn't find my favorite of all time or anything like that, but I was not disappointed, and I did find a really good story. So I recommend it. I'm pretty sure that if you're a reader that comes looking for fantasy, for adventure, a female protagonist, unicorns, or even an interesting story, this is going to be a good read for you. And I do recommend it. And I wouldn't recommend it if it had disappointed me at the end here, or if it had not been a good story, because I make sure that I recommend good stuff, so that you can see that you can trust my taste and what I recommend. And also what I do, because I am a writer of stories as well, like this author. So yeah, I want you to know what I liked and what I disliked, and also share with you, because if I enjoyed this, I'm pretty sure that many people are going to enjoy it as well. And it was a good read at the end. I was satisfied for sure. So now I will probably do another video. I want to do one video which is not a review. This right now was a review, but I want to do another video focus on the 4th book and the story of the 4th book, which is going to be spoiler rich. So that one is for people that already read it, and I'm going to discuss what I thought about this story, what I liked, what I disliked. I probably won't do that one today, but I will also do a philosophical talk based on ideas from this book. So yeah, if you still want to see more of me talking about these books, you will be able to see much more.